Welcome to Rings and Things, where we discuss Tolkien adaptations and texts.
We're just two hobbits from the Shire, one bringing the other along on this adventure.
I'm your host, Agnes, and this is my co-host,
Recurring guest star,
JD. Today, we're going to be covering the first half of The Return of the King.
The beginning of this, the prologue, I wanted to talk a bit about, because when I watched this a few years ago for my initial time, this is the scene that stuck with me the most from the entire movie, more than the grand finale, more than anything else, was Sméagol's flashback, specifically him eating that fish later on. But we'll cover the plot of it first. So cuts back to Sméagol when he found the ring. It's revealed that he doesn't actually find the ring, it's his cousin, and he murders him for it. And really, I think it's kind of funny that that's not... Watching this time, it did disturb me quite a bit to watch them fighting.
Why do you think that was?
You know, like, Hobbit society and culture and all the Hobbits we've seen are not the type to, like, strangle another one on the bank of a river for an object. I get that's the power of the ring, but just seeing it was... like, it was uncanny in a way, or odd, just like seeing such cute creatures that we seem to be so lively and lovely get like dark and scary and evil. So watching it again really definitely stuck with me.
Remember, these are hobbits from 500 years ago as well. They're not the hobbits that we know. A good reason to believe that there must have been some cultural differences is that it seems accepted that Sméagol should be receiving presents on his birthday. But remember, Hobbit society gives presents on a birthday.
Oh, right.
So somewhere along the line, there have been some societal, cultural shifts.
Also, they're in a boat.
That's also true.
It doesn't seem like they're...
Those boats, man, they're dangerous.
Yeah, I wonder what that says. There's never a water scene that goes right. So I did have my first question. My prologue question is, Sméagol says they cursed us, called us murderer, and drove us away. He uses, pronouns weirdly. Is he saying they as in the ring, the other hobbits, both? Is it specific there? Do you know?
I think it was intended to be about the other hobbits, that the other hobbits cursed Sméagol, called him a murderer, and drove him away from their hobbit settlement. But I think it is poetic to ascribe it to the ring as well. That the ring cursed Sméagol, the ring accused him of murder, and the ring ended up forcing him away as well, is also, strictly speaking, not inaccurate.
Yeah, that's why I was like, hold on, who's he talking about here exactly? Who's they?
I really liked the double reading of it. So
this scene, especially when he's comforting himself by holding the ring, and right before he's talking about how much he knows he's degraded. I've heard people compare in online discussions the ring to drug addiction. I never saw it really throughout the rest of the film, but I can see in this epilogue how it could strike that chord with some people, especially if that's something that was something you've ever had to deal with in your personal life, one way or the other.
Well, this is actually something we'll talk about later on, because the drug addiction application was something that Peter Jackson wanted to put into the movie. It's not just something people talk about in online forums. It was something claimed by the creating artist that it was meant to be there.
Yeah, personally for me, like when I was watching Frodo's relationship or Bilbo's relationship with the ring, I don't see it as much, but Gollum Sméagol's relationship to the ring, especially in this epilogue, how it's his life is going into shambles, and it's because of this ring, but the ring is comforting enough to hide all of that. It's a pretty apt metaphor, I feel. So after the epilogue, it cuts back to current events. There's a quick scene where it shows Sam and Frodo and Gollum traveling. It's setting up something later, but they're running low on lembas bread. I did think that felt like it was World War I inspired. I know that there was a lot of supply chain issues in a lot of places in the 1910s in Europe on the battlefronts.
And rationing would have been something that people on the home front would have known about too.
Also true. I didn't consider that. World War II rationing was really big on the home front. And Tolkien was in England for World War II, so that was something he was probably also thinking about.
Great Britain was very aggressive in their rationing. in World War II because it had gone so badly in World War I.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty dire times in to be anywhere in Europe back then. I mean, even America had some minor rationing, but it was in World War II, but it was not the same. It wasn't food rations. I think it was like materials like copper and aluminum and steel.
I think food was rationed in World War II in the U.S.
I could be wrong on that. It's possible. I just haven't heard of it, but I'm not an expert. Anyway, back to Return of the King. Merry, Pippin, and the rest of the Fellowship and most of Theoden, really, most of the warriors of Theoden, all go to Isengard and join up to capture Saruman. I thought this scene was really interesting. So right up top, Saruman gets killed. I don't remember him dying. I don't remember how that resolved until I watched this again and seen it. This scene I thought was interesting. I have a lot of notes on him. He was suing with peace with Theoden, and I don't have the exact quote, but the way he worded it, like, was very cunning. Like the way he might have genuinely been suing for peace, but he made it seem like they were almost aggressors attacking him when it was the opposite. Like he's like, oh, let's bury this hatchet and stop coming at me. He didn't say anything like that, but that's the vibe of what he said.
Isn't that always how aggressors sue for peace?
Yeah, it's true. And so there's a bit of a standoff. Saruman's in his tower and still powerful, so he thinks. Gandalf is warning others not to attack him because they need information. And I don't know if this is a correct reading, but I was kind of with Gandalf, and I wasn't sure if Saruman actually would have joined forces or if they just needed his information. I guess we'll never find out, but he might have been desperate enough to actually give up working with Sauron, I was getting from the scene.
Well, Saruman in this scene in the movie is definitely telling a different story than book Saruman. I would interpret the movie Saruman as actually not entirely dismissing the possibility of rejoining the good guys. Grima Wormtongue kills Saruman as he's agreeing to work with Gandalf and company. He says, "Remove your guard and I will tell you where your doom will be decided." And the context of the movie, to me, makes it feel like he might not be into pity, mercy, and all the good guy stuff, but he's at least willing to cooperate with Gandalf for his own reasons, which, is the first step of, if you're hanging out with the good guys, you might become a good guy yourself eventually.
During the standoff, I noted this. I do want to mention it. Gandalf disarms Saruman. He tells him your staff is broken, even though he just launched a fireball with it. And then he looks at it and it falls to pieces. And this is what I like about magic and Lord of the Rings and soft magic systems in general. There's not spell like break staff. Like he spoke it into existence and it happened. That's like what I feel like magic really should be. I wrote down, because I know this is a little trivia fact I know. Abracadabra apparently comes from Aramaic. I create as I speak. I think it's abracadabra. Something I forget the actual Aramaic, but it's something I've heard once.
I was really interested in this note that you made, so I did some checking on it as well. And what I found was that the Oxford sources say that abracadabra is from 4th century Latin of unknown origin, and it's attested in a 16th century healing spell. Then I was reading a National Geographic article on it, and I clicked away to look for something else to make a note, and when I came back, it was like, oh, you can't have access to this article again. So, as best as I can remember from the article, it was saying that Aramaics, I create as I speak, is one speculation of where abracadabra might have come from. Another possibility is Hebrew's I will create man, and it also talked about the 16th century healing spell and said that it was of Jewish Italian origin. The article was saying that the word abracadabra fell out of popularity until Aleister Crowley brought it back in the 19th century occult revival, and he drew upon Kabbalah, which is a Jewish mystic practice. And I think it's interesting how all of these origin stories always come back to Aramaic or Hebrew or Jewish origins.
I think, okay, and I might be wrong on this, but I will create man and the cadabra, is that related to cadaver, I wonder?
I think cadaver is a Romance word.
Yeah, I think it's Latin, and I don't remember if Aramaic, Hebrew, and all that are part of even Proto-Indo-European or not.
Cadaver is from Latin.
It's interesting to hear the alternate interpretations. I am also interested in these the book comparisons. It comes up a lot. It seems like the movies change a lot from the books. But it's really getting me itching to read the books because I need to know the differences.
The movies do change a lot, and I don't necessarily think that's always a bad thing, because the movies are telling a good story.
Yeah. After Grima kills Saruman, he does fall onto a water wheel, which is an industrial machine.
I think that is an awesome observation.
The next scene, it has Legolas and Gimli in a quick comic relief scene with the drinking contest, but why? Is it just because he's an elf that he can drink so much? Is that something elves can do?
Not really. There's... In The Hobbit, the elves drink a bunch of wine and become drunk. It's a plot point that Bilbo and the dwarves get to sneak past the drunk guard elves. I think this is mostly Peter Jackson's sense of humor coming out.
Yeah, it is really funny. And so, cutting back to Sam and Frodo with Sméagol and them getting to Mordor, this scene starts to reveal that Gollum's planning to betray Frodo and Sam, and he's working towards that end. He's leading them into a trap. The last movie I mentioned, Gollum and Sméagol with the armchair therapy bit I had. Like, by any means, this is not what I meant by respect your past self for doing what you needed to survive. Like, you still are responsible for understanding that you don't need to be that anymore, and not letting it make bad choices is important, which is not what's happening here. It's the opposite. He's regressing.
Sméagol is not doing nice things anymore. He kind of abandoned that path really after he felt Frodo betrayed him in the Two Towers at the pool with Faramir.
Right. Yeah. No. And I remember those scenes, but I don't remember it ever having like a specific scene where I'm done trying to be good or I'm done trying to work with Frodo. It just seemed like it sort of happened. I don't know if I missed it.
Do you remember the very last scene of the end of the Two Towers where he's mumbling to himself while Frodo and Sam are walking behind him, and he's pretty upset at the perceived betrayal of Frodo? He says that we'll take them to her.
Right. I do remember that.
That's the beginning of the betrayal.
Okay. Yeah. On the other end of it, they captured a relic from Saruman, which if they mentioned the name of that, I also missed.
That's called a palantir.
They captured a palantir from Saruman. Pippin retrieves it, and seems like with all magic items, it has a slightly irresistible allure. Gandalf has to tell him in like a hurried and excited tone to hand it over to snap him out of it, but he is very interested in it. Later, after a grand feast, Pippin needs to go back and check out what that was, which gets him into a bit of trouble.
Fool of a Took. He looks into the palantir, and Sauron looks into him, and then Gandalf has to take Pippin away.
This is all good getting ahead of myself, but I definitely don't remember Gandalf saying, "Oh, he's going to think you have the ring. We have to go." Like, that was a big shock to me when he said that.
Yeah, well, Sauron knows that a hobbit has the ring, and here's a hobbit
playing with some magical cursed items.
So maybe he has the ring. Isn't
right.
so far from an accurate thought.
Yeah. I mean, he's not far off. Pippin is like 1 degree of separation from the right answer, so he's getting close. When they approach Denethor, I'll get it eventually. When they approach Denethor, there's one of the funniest scenes in the whole 3 movies. He breaks down Pippin, don't mention that Boromir's dead, and then he goes on and mentions 3 more things. He's like, it's better in fact if you don't speak at all. Peregrine took that. Really was funny. And it also cracked me up that it took him about 3 minutes before he cracked and started swearing fealties and dropping lores. He does it right away. He speaks. It was really funny to me.
He's a fool of a Took.
But honestly, if it was just Gandalf telling him not to talk and that was all, that would have been funny enough. But then him doing it was really funny. Denethor calls Gandalf in this scene in a couple of under a Mithrandir?
Mithrandir. It means Grey Pilgrim. It's an elvish name for Gandalf.
Okay. Is it a title or like more like a nickname or both?
It's a name.
It's a name.
Think like Mithril and Mithrandir. They both have that Mith in them.
Yes.
Meaning grey. Yes. So the elves call him Grey Pilgrim Mithrandir.
Got it. And he's Gandalf the Grey. That makes sense. Yeah. And then Denethor also reveals to Gandalf during this fiasco that he mentioned, like I said, 4 different things he said he didn't want him to know, and 3 of the 4 he said he called him out on before they could even have a real conversation. And it wasn't poor Pippin's fault. It was stuff he knew independently. He didn't know who holds the ring, I believe.
Right. I think it was 3 things that Gandalf said. He said, don't mention Frodo and the ring, don't mention anything about Boromir's death, and don't mention that Aragorn is on his way to become king.
Right, that was the 3rd one.
And Denethor already knew about Boromir's death and Aragorn and his claim to being king, but nothing was said about Frodo and the ring, and Pippin did not blow that one either.
He did his job in that regard. I know we touched on this before when you were talking about way back Aragorn in general as a character, but I think Denethor is not completely unreasonable to be suspicious of Aragorn's claim. Like it's really, you mentioned how old it was, and watching this movie, I don't think it's very clear at this point, unless I missed something again. But it just says that Aragorn is the heir. It doesn't say he's the heir from a long lineage of people who didn't get on the throne. Not to mention, like, even if it was just one generation, it would be really predictable that the steward wouldn't want to give up the power, and maybe understandable. So, like, I'm not a Denethor stan by any means, but I understand where he's coming from here in being suspicious of Aragorn as a ruler, if we're speaking purely logically.
No, it makes sense. Aragorn's claim is one that has been rejected in the past. His forefathers who have tried to make some claim to the throne have in the past also been rejected. It's just a matter of Aragorn is going to try again and see what happens. Aragorn and Denethor actually have something of a past, but Aragorn went by a different name then.
Is this covered in the movies at all? Or is that in the books?
It's not. It's covered in the appendices to the books.
Okay, so we'll get to it eventually. I'm interested to hear more. I wanted to note down, too, during all of this, it was a scene that Pippin getting dressed or looking at armor and saying, this is just going to be a ceremonial role, right? And sure, Pippin kind of played a role in this too, but Gandalf has a knack for getting people in mortal peril. Like 3 hobbits that I can name, he played a big role in getting them on a grand adventure, which is, sounds fun, but grand adventures usually, despite the reward, have great risk.
That sounds a lot like something Wormtongue was saying about, you are a herald of woe. Ill news is an ill guest.
Like I felt bad reading the book. I felt bad that Bilbo had to go on the journey. I felt bad for Frodo even more because it's not just a journey that's a trouble. It's a magical cursed item that damages you as a person. And now Pippin's on the firing line in multiple ways too because of this big journey. And I get the fate requires it to go this way, and Gandalf's just helping fate get along its path. But it just feels like he's starting to be responsible for some of this. But maybe I'm taking it a bit too far, blaming him.
Well, I guess, especially with this Pippin thing, or more broadly in general, at what point do you think that Gandalf has specifically done something wrong?
Yeah, he hasn't. It's his presence that causes events. Like, if he weren't around, a lot of more things would be even worse, too. So he's a net gain on everything. But he definitely, and maybe, I just made this connection now. This is what the movie directors were trying to get at when they were having him argue with Theoden about going out directly into battle instead of going to Helm's Deep, is that Gandalf is like, he has chaotic energy surrounding him. And things kind of fall apart or fall into place faster when he is acting on the world. Sometimes it seems like for the worst, even if it always works out in the end. And I don't think Gandalf's a bad person or a bad character. I just think he has a darker streak than I realized. I feel like he's not like all, he's not evil or malicious, but he is almost, it feels like negligent in a way to just impose all of this on these people so suddenly. And maybe that's a metaphor too for how the world will thrust destiny onto you. But man, it sometimes hits me like I felt bad for Pippin, like getting ready, looking at that armor and realizing, oh, I might actually have to use this.
Well, it's also Pippin's fault for being there.
Yeah, Pippin did really make a big couple of oopsies. I would say 2 in a row, because he touched the orb, and then he chose of his own free volition to swear fealty to Denethor. Like, he didn't have to do that at all.
Yeah, exactly.
In this scene also, Pippin says there are no more stars because the shadow that is being purposely made to descend to help the advance of the army from Sauron's forces from Mordor. But I also thought maybe this is a reference to light pollution blocking out stars from industrialization.
I loved this reading of Sauron's darkness. I thought this was an absolutely brilliant observation.
This is how I feel when I go into the city and I can't see stars. At least it's not helping an army advance towards me, but I love looking at the stars at night. My notes aren't following the plot very well, so I think the next scene is they're talking about the Witch King. I always note down that's a really cool title, like especially villain or hero. I love that. I don't know what it is about it. Witch King is really cool.
Yeah, the Gandalf is outlining who the Witch King is.
Right. Oh, because I remember Pippin's like, we're gonna be fine. We have you, and he's like, well, there's a snare in that. There's somebody who might be able to put a challenge to me or be on that level. I remember now. As after that discussion, they go to this beacon, the beacon of Amundin. Is that even how it's pronounced?
The beacon of Amundin.
Amundine. Oh, right. I remember thinking like dinner. Dean.
And Gandalf has Pippin climb up and light the beacon on fire, which starts the chain reaction to call for aid from Rohan. Because in the movie, Denethor won't actually call for aid.
Yes.
In the book, Denethor called for aid before they arrived. This whole thing about Gondor and Rohan pettiness feels so contrived to me. They wasted so much time on this. In the book, they just help each other. There is no question about whether Rohan will show up or whether Rohan should go help Gondor. The question is, will they make it in time? But not a questioning of the loyalty. I
really liked the messiness of this drama. I didn't like some of the contrivances. This one was kind of, it felt real. Like, I don't know, Denethor seems like he'd be that pity. And even Theoden seems like his line earlier in the movie where it says, why should we go to their aid when they're not? I disagree with that philosophy 100%, but it's definitely something that somebody would say. Like, I could imagine that being somebody's answer to calling for aid against, and the thing is they're fighting like like pure evil. It shouldn't be a controversial thing at all, so it makes sense also in the book that they're just smart and don't do the dumb thing, but I feel like it's more human that they're this petty and dumb in the face of evil.
But Theoden didn't make that pettiness, even though some other lesser person might have done it. Theoden didn't do it, and I think this somewhat gets at a difference between the medieval world philosophy and today's philosophy, that oaths were really, really important in medieval culture. In the Lord of the Rings world, oaths are sacred, and oaths have been sworn between Rohan and Gondor. They're not going to default on that.
Yeah, I do understand that, and I mean, also, if we want to go back to World War I, there was England was only involved with it because of a 100-year-old treaty that was a promise of Belgium's independence. So that, and I've always pushed the idea of that, even though it's not medieval, that was the death of the old world, and that was like an old world idea hitting like the modern industrial world, you know. So that also plays into these oaths being important, and I do get that, and I don't know the specifics of the oath, but is the Knights of Rohan are there? They have an oath to aid Gondor, but is not reciprocal, and that's why he'd be expected to be called upon even if Gondor gave no aid. Is that the point?
Gondor, I think, has come to Rohan's aid once in the past, and Rohan has come, this would now be twice, I believe. I would have to reread the Oath. There actually is a story of the Oath. I would have to revisit the specific wording of it.
I didn't have a bullet point, so you couldn't have researched it, but maybe we could do this as a follow-up.
Sure. So as the beacons are being lit, there's some time taken to some more broad sweeping landscape shots of the mountains and the beacons lighting up over the mountaintops. And I was thinking this time that the broad sweeping landscape shots really give the soundtrack its time to shine. It gives a great time for us to get familiar with the new musical set for Gondor.
I agree. During that scene, I was mostly just, like, I was wondering, because you're right, the plot contrivance of, like, if he can just call on these people to help him, I was wondering the whole time, and kind of distracted me. Like, what? Why didn't he just do this right away? And they have all these people on standby to light these beacons, and they usually probably don't, or ever. They may never have it. Got the feeling that this is, like, not been done in a long time.
I think it happened once before.
Yeah, and like, what's the downside of lighting the beacons? I don't get it. I didn't get that. That's what I was like, what are they, like, is there a cost to calling upon the oath other than, like, honor or something like that?
The only downside is, do you really need it? And the answer is yes, they really need it. And in the book, Denethor had already called for aid. This was not a problem.
Yeah. So I guess I do see why it caused a little confusion, because I should have more enjoyed the broad sweeping landscape scenes and soundtrack instead of wondering why he didn't do this sooner. So it does have Faramir defending some runes on the outskirts. They do have a name. It starts with an O. Osgiliath. Orcs in this scene are sneaky, and they come up an opposite way they're expecting, and there's some intense combat. And I thought some of the deaths of the footmen in the nameless soldiers in the scene were pretty brutal and gnarly and pushing the PG-13 rating. So then he has to go back. He has to tell his dad he lost Osgiliath. Denethor gives him a really hard time about it, and Faramir gets like berated and is told to, like, go get it back, and he doesn't seem to mind very much. Like, he's not very upset about it. And also there's a scene in Pippin's in the room where he basically directly says, yeah, I do kind of wish you died instead of Boromir. And again, in that scene, he doesn't get angry. He doesn't get visibly sad. He's just okay with it, it seems like.
I think he gets visibly sad.
Do you?
But it's very subtle.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it's because his dad's a king. He knows better to actually verbally argue with him. It might be as simple as that, but I don't know. To me, I got the sense like it's not the first time he's heard something like this.
He just wants to have his father's approval. He has daddy issues.
Yeah.
So I noticed that in the Arwen storyline that we've been revisiting occasionally, Arwen comes back from the Havens, and Faramir has a change of heart. And I was thinking about these two stories in parallel, that they both have someone going down a path and then suddenly drastically changing his mind, whether it's deciding to stay for the love of her life or letting Sam and Frodo go. Each of these characters was pursuing a particular end and then just decided to ups and completely change it. I also was thinking about movie Elrond may have left out some information when he was encouraging Arwen to go into the West, but Arwen's relationship with her father is much better than Faramir's relationship with his father.
Yeah, one's shaky and the other's just like really bad.
Arwen and Elrond have a very loving relationship. Movie Elrond just didn't give all the information right away to Arwen.
Yeah, movie Elrond still doesn't seem like a very loving dad. It would have been a great change. I feel like it would have been refreshing for me to see just like a great relationship between parent and child in a fantasy work, because I feel like that just rarely happened.
There isn't a lot about their relationship in the book at all.
Yeah, which is fine.
What there is, though, seems fairly positive to me, I would say.
I do think it's interesting, real quick, that, again, the parallels the directors had. Is this another, like, book to movie adaptation? Is, like, that these scenes are cut close together? Or is this following the pacing of the book a lot more than the other ones?
Like the second book, the third book is split into two halves. One that follows Merry, Pippin, Aragorn, Legolas, Gandalf, Gimli, all of them. And then the second half of the book follows Frodo and Sam until eventually everybody comes back together.
Got it. Okay. So, yeah, all of these scenes being cut together in the way they are, I always wonder how the directional choice was made then if it's not following the pacing of the book.
In fact, Frodo and Sam aren't even in the Return of the King yet in the book.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's just the end, right?
Frodo and Sam's adventures at this point in the movie, where Smeagol is throwing away the lembas bread and all that. First of all, that scene doesn't happen in the books, but second of all, if it did happen in the books, it would have been during the Two Towers.
Okay.
The entire Shelob sequence is in the Two Towers.
Right. Yeah, so it's hard to compare to because the books and the movies are like, they have different barriers almost of content, where the content is.
And different barriers for different characters.
Yeah. Yeah, no, throwing that lembas bread out was like not even questionable. Like, that's dooming them to starvation. It really was like, wow, he's gone. He's evil again, definitely. He's not just considering it, he's doing it.
I don't even think Book Gollum could have touched the lembas bread.
No.
No, I don't think he could have handled touching it.
Too gross.
Too elvish.
Yeah.
So as I was saying, he didn't actually throw the lembas bread in the book. And Frodo doesn't send Sam away in the book. This is a fairly major departure, I would say, because it represents that movie Frodo has actually fallen under the spell that Gollum has metaphorically cast on him, whereas book Frodo knows beyond any doubt that Gollum is treacherous, and his willingness to go where Gollum leads them has nothing to do with not trusting Sam.
Yeah, no, that was something I was wondering about, because you did mention that book Frodo doesn't trust Gollum at all.
No, not at all. This is something that was added to the movie to illustrate that drug addiction narrative, that the drugs cause you to trust the wrong people and reject the ones who are really looking after you.
Oh, wow. I think, honestly, it was pretty hard to see Sam sobbing, though. I do think that was something that stuck with me.
Something I was thinking about this time watching it is that both Frodo and Sam still have a lack of food problem, regardless of whether Sam ate it or Gollum threw it away.
Yeah.
What exactly does Frodo plan to do about this situation that he doesn't have any food for? And how exactly is Sam going to plan to go home on no food?
They weren't arguing over what they should do now that that's the problem they're facing, and trying to find blame, which is never productive. Although I think he told him to go home over the fact that he offered to carry the ring was the point I was getting.
Yeah, but they still have no food. Like, what is...
Yeah.
Sam is going to turn around and go home on no food? Or is Sam going to, follow his master behind because he has no food and going home isn't going to work?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
This is the same Hobbit who was ready to drown to follow Frodo and make sure he didn't go to Mordor alone. He's going to turn around and go home.
I feel like Sam and Frodo, neither of them would make it very long without the other, to be honest.
Frodos need their Sams and Sams need their Frodos.
It does show Elrond reveal to Aragorn that Arwen is coming around, and he gives him a cool magic sword forged from the broken sword. That cut the ring from Sauron's hand.
Yep.
I remember the broken one's called Isildur. What's the reforged sword's name again?
Isildur is the one who wielded the sword.
Oh.
The old sword was named Narsil, and the new sword is named Anduril.
Okay. Narsil, and the new one's Anduril. So that's the one Aragorn has now.
Yes. Anduril means Flame of the West.
I just wanted to note down, I don't think this is a hot take or something that many people miss, but the magic sword and having the true claim definitely is, without a doubt, had to be inspired by King Arthur, considering this book's author.
Yes, Tolkien has some Arthur translations, and I'm sure it has to do with more than Arthur as well. Arthur also comes from a greater tradition, so I would say it's probably definitely has a relation to Arthur, but there's a larger medieval tradition that this kind of thing rose on as well. Arthur is just one of the well-known examples of that tradition.
And then he's going to conjure the dead to help them fight, which doesn't seem like something the good guys would be doing.
So I really like thinking about Aragorn summoning the dead because, like you say, it does feel like one of the more questionable choices in the story, and I think it's just really good to try to weigh the moral implications of these actions. I think this one is one of the most interesting to think about. On the one hand, Aragorn is making a deal with souls at unrest, evil beings who are here because they broke their oaths. Notice again how important oaths are, that these men can't go to an afterlife because of an oath. But on the other hand, he's also, Aragorn is offering these pitiable souls at unrest a chance to fulfill their oath and offering them peace.
The redemption theme I thought was interesting, but still, like, even maybe I'm being too visual with this, but they look like bad guys. They and I get that they're bad guys, but they don't seem like the people you want to side with. And the thing that really confuses me is Tolkien, his thing a lot of times is don't have questionable means to an end. But I think he kind of loopholes it by giving these souls a chance for redemption. And that's how it's not like just making a pact with evil people. It's more like redeeming these souls and also it benefiting you, you know.
Exactly, and it's because you're not supposed to take bad means to a good end that it makes this entire situation very interesting to think about. Is Aragorn using bad means to get a good end? Will he be punished for it? If he is it actually not bad means? Is it good means? This is one of the more gray areas. Some people will tell you that Tolkien is all black and white, good and evil, and sure, there is a very well-defined concept of good and evil, but when you think about some of the things going on, there are many, many shades of gray. Notice that Aragorn also wasn't exactly super keen to be making deals with the dead either.
No, he did not want to. He had to, but he didn't want to.
The souls of the dead in the book don't actually have much of a visual presence. Their presence is more that of creeping dread behind you as you know that there's an army of undead souls haunting everything behind you and you have summoned them, which isn't any better.
Very much worse, honestly. That's
But you don't see them.
Yeah, that's one of the advantages of writing. I feel like the descriptions in a book, if you're trying to unnerve somebody, like the feeling of fear is easy to get into that headspace more than just using visuals. Like it's more cerebral than that.
There's definitely different artistic tools to be used in a visual or literary medium.
Is this not in the book? Is that what this next note is about?
So my next observation was that it always seems a very odd way to cut the movie to me, to have Pippin go to find Gandalf, then get sent back to Denethor, only to have to go and find Gandalf again to save Faramir's life. There's a lot of adaptational changes that happen between the book and the movie. The book has a lot more detail, a lot more characters, a lot of small things are going on that the movie cut. That's fine. I'm not complaining about that. My only observation is that it always seemed weird to have that back and forth that didn't really seem to further the plot or the characters much to me.
Yeah, that was pretty weird.
Like, all he says the first time to Gandalf is, they called us out to fight. And then an orc attacks them and Gandalf sends him back to Denethor.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just seemed a really weird way to cut the movie, because this is definitely choices made by the editors in post.
Right, it's not in the book like that.
And it's not even necessarily in the script. It's how the scenes that they filmed were cut together.
Speaking of strange choices in the way that you cover the scenes, I did want to go back a minute because when Faramir, so we're talking about Faramir now that they think he's dead. The scene that takes him out where they go and charge the orcs, him running into certain death. That was also another, I feel like, possible alliteration not alliteration, a possible like application, right? If we're using the Tolkien terms, not allegory, but application that of World War I applying to this, the Doom charge, that was a very, very prominent thing for that. People being told to run into certain death. And I feel like Doom charges are also common in medieval poems and historical literature of like tales of knights as well. And this was directional adaptational too, but the way they were just charging into literal arrows flying at them too, it was like it definitely gave me like storming the Dead Man's Land vibe.
Yeah, I think the larger role that this plays in the moral scheme of the story is having to do with what ends and means are, the relationships between ends and means. Is it what level of certainty does it take to justify throwing a battalion of men at a lost cause?
Faramir didn't seem upset by it, though, at least on the surface. He seemed to accept his oath or his role. Like that's his job. That's what he has to do.
Almost unhealthily.
Yeah, that's true. It almost was a suicide, I guess.
Denethor didn't have a lot of hope of retaking Osgiliath with this gambit, but I think he probably felt that he really needed it strategically and needed to slow Sauron down as much as he could. At least Book Denethor would have felt this way. And then that brings up the moral question of, is it okay to order this battalion of men into certain death? And it's a tough question to answer.
Yeah, it's well, at least it's something I'll never have to worry about, hopefully. One
of the things I kept track of in the movie this time was how much of the movie was not Return of the King. And what I mean by that was I just kept a watch on the timestamps. I counted anything that was before where the Return of the King book started for each of these storylines, and anything was before the transition that was extra scenes I counted in this. I didn't count movie extras that were timed with the events of the Return of the King book.
Yeah, that's what I thought you were initially getting at, like stuff that was movie adaptations, not in any of the books. But you're talking about things that are in the books but not in Return of the King, mostly, is what you mean, right?
Well, like Gollum throwing the bread and Frodo sending Sam away is not in the book. But if it were in the book, it would have been timed in the Two Towers.
Right. Okay, I understand.
So I'm counting that.
Understood.
But I wouldn't count scenes that are interjected by the movie post when the characters have ended up in Return of the King.
Okay. That makes sense.
So when I added up all the time that was from the Two Towers, there was 67 minutes of Two Towers material in this movie.
I wonder if somebody could do a master cut where they edit all of those scenes somewhere into the Two Towers and then start Return of the King where it does in the book. Wouldn't it would be like a 5-hour long movie for the Two Towers then, right?
Well, you could also cut out all the made up material in the Two Towers.
Yeah, I suppose. The book cut. I still feel like the Two Towers would be longer than the rest, even though the books short. You said they get progressively shorter. I feel like with just what you're covering, everything and the screen time it gets in the movies, that all of this covered in one book. I can't believe it's not like the largest book either.
It's because so much of this material is from the Two Towers.
Yeah. The Two Towers seems like it has a lot of bases to cover. Whenever we get to that book, like plot-wise, if we're doing comparisons to the movie, I feel like we're going to be spending more time on the Two Towers than anywhere else.
I think the Two Towers is a great book that's poorly represented by its movie comparative to the other two.
Yeah, so far covering this, we're almost through these movies. I'm almost disappointed we're not reading the books sooner, hearing all these differences. But that's just my personal thing. I think we have a great plan of where we're going in terms of like following the viewership of a modern person picking it up. But man, I want to read these books. I want to see these differences that you keep mentioning.
Well, hopefully we'll get to reading the books very soon. Next we'll have to be doing the Hobbit movies after this. Right.
And would you say that's it for the rings?
So now let's do our things. So our favorite quotes. what was your favorite quote?
The one that I wrote down as I was watching it, Pippin says, in reference to Boromir's death, the mightiest man baby slain by one arrow. And that was really good. I really liked that one.
It zinged you right in the heart?
Yeah. I don't know. Pippin is a character, like, I know that he had a lot of development, but he really grew on me in this movie. He's aiming for my favorite from the Fellowship almost now.
I really like Pippin too.
Did you want to mention any quotes?
Yes. One of my favorite quotes is when Aragorn runs in and says, Gondor calls for aid. And as much as I don't like the whole drama between Rohan and Gondor, it was that line that inspired the name for our dog, Gondor, so that when he jumps on the back door and asks to go outside, we can say, Gondor calls for aid.
That's so good. I was wondering why the dog is named after a place, but it makes sense now.
That's exactly why.
The ones that you just use in day-to-day life are always the best ones, personally. I don't think I'll get much use out of my quote from this time in my day-to-day life, but who knows?
So we have a Hobbit Habit for you. JD, have you ever thought that you just need to be a little bit more hobbity?
Yeah, most of the time, actually.
This episode is actually being released on the first day of Yule, and hobbits observe Yule. Remember, they have a month called Before Yule and After Yule.
Right, yeah.
And so I was thinking that it would be pretty hobbity if people observed Yuletide with a cozy fire in the fireplace, or if you didn't have a fireplace, to use some fireplace ambiance instead. And you could also get a mug of hot tea or cocoa and just enjoy some nice seasonal coziness and ambiance. Or you could do it on Christmas or New Year's or an otherwise unmarked cozy winter night if you wanted to. So I was planning to do this when around the time that this episode is being released, and I'll get back to y'all about how hobbity it makes me feel.
Yeah, I'm excited. I would love to do some mindfulness with a comfy. I do have a heater with a fireplace image on it. That might work, like a space heater with a fireplace LED. I was going to just do the fireplace ambience, but that might be slightly better because of the warmth. Anyway, I am excited. Cup of hot cocoa. If you add some cloves to it, makes it taste super Christmassy for some reason.
Ooh, that sounds good.
And so that is going to be exciting for me. I'm ready for that.
Awesome. So JD, we have questions that need answering.
All right, this one's from some very curious Shire folk. In the movies, we see that when one ring is worn by the hobbits, they disappear or turn invisible. But when Sauron wears the ring, he doesn't disappear. Why?
So this question gets at the metaphysics of Middle-earth. Mm-hmm. There are what I will characterize as two dimensions to the world. There's the physical world and the spiritual world. Now, keep in mind that this is mostly my vocabulary. This is not explained in these terms in the text.
Right. I appreciate that, honestly.
So some beings exist in one or the other or both of these worlds. Remember the demigods, the Maiar, and the elves, they exist in both worlds, while men, the humans, exist only in the physical world. Hobbits are an extension of men. And so hobbits also exist only in the physical world. Mm-hmm. Elves and the godlike beings have another dimension to their existence that men and hobbits do not. All the rings of power, not just the one ring, pull humans and hobbits into the spiritual world, which makes them invisible in the physical one, since they can only exist in one world at a time. So a ring of power rips you out of the physical world and brings you to the spiritual world.
So then, I have some questions, some tests to your theory. So have we seen anybody besides a hobbit put on the one ring other than Sauron in these films? Or in the books, or in the Silmarillion even, that you know of offhand? I know this is off the dome.
We know that the rings for men, the 9 rings, made their men invisible, if they wanted to anyway, and caused them to fade into the spiritual world.
Okay, so it's suppose you could presuppose that they would turn invisible from the One Ring.
The Isildur put on the One Ring and went invisible.
He did go invisible. Okay, and we've never seen an elf wear the One Ring either.
An elf has never worn the One Ring, and elves do not turn invisible when they wear their elven rings. An elf, I don't think, would turn invisible if he wore the One Ring, because remember, elves exist in the spiritual world already. It's not going to rip them out of the physical world like it would a man or a hobbit.
Right, so this all follows because we've seen men wear rings, magic rings. Obviously, we've seen men also wear non-magical rings, but we've seen the effects of the rings on men. We've seen the effects of the rings on elves. It doesn't turn elves invisible. It does turn men invisible. So the One Ring would just assume we would assume it's an extension of that, and that makes a lot of sense then. So they get pulled into the spiritual world, right? My next question is, if they're pulled in the spiritual world, but they turn invisible and can still affect the physical world, is that saying something about the spiritual world in Tolkien's world building?
The spiritual world definitely has real effects on the physical world, if that's what you're asking.
That's purely, is there beings that exist purely in the spiritual world naturally without the ring?
Yes.
And can they like physically move objects and stuff like that, as the hobbits when they wear the ring do sometimes?
And they can take physical form. This would be who people like Sauron and Gandalf truly are.
Maiar.
The Maiar are spiritual beings who can manifest physical bodies. Gandalf is specifically incarnated. He has a body that can die, as opposed to the other Valar could take on more spiritual bodies. They would take up space, but they would be not killable the same way Gandalf is killable.
So this all tracks from. I feel like you've presented a strong case that why Sauron doesn't turn invisible when he wears the One Ring, and just a good explanation about why the hobbits turn invisible in the films when they wear it.
Thank you. It's also my personal belief that when a man or a hobbit has used a ring of power, this gives that person a certain permanent spiritual existence, which is unnatural to him. In the books, we can see Frodo having sharper senses, and things have changed about him after he's worn the ring. And I believe that this is why Bilbo, Frodo, and eventually Sam is going to put on the ring at some point. And they all need to seek long-term healing from the elves in order to find their eventual peace. I think that healing is the closing off of the unnatural spiritual presence that they've gotten from putting on the ring. Yeah,
that's interesting. I wonder, and I know Tolkien says he doesn't like strict allegory, but I wonder what he's speaking to in the fact that wearing the ring damages your soul so that you need to go get specific healing.
Maybe this would be better saved for the podcast where we're actually talking about the ending scenes.
All right, podcast listeners, insert disc 2.
So just a quick reminder, if you are enjoying the podcast, please consider contributing to our efforts through the Patreon link in the description.
You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram through the links in the description. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other major podcast platforms. To have your question or comment featured on the podcast, please send an email to shirepost.ringsandthings@gmail.com.
A hearty Hobbity thank you to our first supporter, Lori J. from Florida. We are deeply grateful for your support.
Woohoo! And also a special thank you to our editor and spiritual producer, Stephen Jeffrey. And thank you for listening.